Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
and me, Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker. Part of a series that was recorded at BookFest Windsor in 2019, this podcast features 4 poets in conversation about Respect, a new anthology of poems inspired by the incredible richness of Detroit music. The book was published in late 2019 by Michigan State University Press. 2 of the poets in this interview were also editors of the book, Jim Daniels and M.L. Liebler. They are joined by Cindy Hunter Morgan and W.D. Ehrhart. Now, here's a conversation with 4 of the poets in Respect, the poetry of Detroit music. In a previous podcast, ML, you talked about how Respect came to be as a book. Jim, what were your thoughts when he approached you about this project?
Well, I was excited about it because I've always been a fan of music and went to a lot of concerts growing up around here. And I tend to be cautious about any kind of collaborative project, but with ML, I know how hard he works. I mean, he's basically he is the Detroit poetry scene, and I've been in some of his other anthologies and collections, so I felt confident going in and knowing his local music connections that we would have a really strong project.
And Cindy and Bill, how did you get involved?
I was in Detroit. I saw ML. I was part of a reading at the Detroit Public Library, and after that reading, ML told me about this project and said, you should send something. And I knew it was going to be a cool project. I didn't want to risk missing out, and I think I sent him something the next day as soon as I was home.
That's awesome, Bill.
Well, and I remember ML asking me if I had any poems about Detroit music, and I said, no. But I had this story called The Summer I Learned to Dance, and basically that day I sat down and I retold that story as a poem, and it became Dancing in the Streets, which is dedicated to Martha and the Vandellas, which was a big song when I was just becoming my own independent teenager. So I sent that to ML the next day. He says, man, that was fast. I said, usually I don't write poems that fast, but that one I already knew what it was going to say.
So anyone around the table, how would you characterize the music of Detroit? I mean, what makes the Detroit regional music scene so special?
Well, I'm curious too. Now I become the interviewer. So Cindy, where are you from? Detroit originally, or are you?
I'm from Michigan. So I grew up for a long time in the Lansing area, and I finished out high school north of Detroit, in the suburbs north of Detroit.
Which one?
Birmingham.
Oh, okay.
And
so you're from around here.
So yeah, we would come down here. You know, it was a big deal to drive down. Come down was fun. We'd come down to Detroit, and then sometimes we'd cross and come have pizza in Windsor.
Mm-hmm.
Windsor pizza is the best. Yeah.
So you grew. What was happening musically in general and in Detroit when you were in high school?
Oh, well, Bob Seger was all over the radio when I was in high school, so I graduated in high school in '86. So he was all over the radio and sometimes spotted around town too, of course. You know, it was in that age, that high school age is when everybody's exploring music. It's an important part of life at that age. It's an important part of your life at any age, but there's a heightened sense of importance of it in your life when you are at that age. And I could feel the presence of that sort of Detroit tradition. Okay. You could feel it. I was aware of that. Yeah, definitely.
Good.
ML, how would you characterize it?
The music of Detroit?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess in ways it seems to me to very gritty, a little bit of a hard edge, no matter if it's, Alice Cooper or John Lee Hooker pounding his foot on the floor and, doing that. Motown is fairly polished stuff, but that's a part of the Detroit scene. It's an important part. But that's how I kind of sense it. There's kind of a grittiness, blue-collar feel, a do-or-die type of, to survive, a sort of vibe within it. It seems like that to me.
Yeah, I was going to say grit. There's always a dash of grit in the recipe for Detroit music, regardless of genre. And you can go across the board with that. With Aretha singing gospel, one of the things about that is there's grit to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that grit and that appreciation for that grit informed my musical preferences. Like I've always liked the, even if it didn't originate in Detroit, I've always liked what you might think of as a Detroit sound because of that grit in other singers.
Mm-hmm.
Things don't sound as authentic without it. Yeah, I would say that has a lot to do with it. Now, when you were growing up, did you have a sense of Detroit music as having a style?
Well, actually, I can't even be certain that a lot of the music I remember is Detroit music, but certainly the Supremes were at the top of their game in 64, 65, 66, 67, when I was finishing high school and going into the Marines. Like Sam Cooke, is he Detroit?
No, he's not. But
Jackie Wilson
is.
Pickett.
Wilson Pickett was
Temptations,
in the Falcons.
Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. All those guys were Marvin Gaye, John Lee Hooker. They were all, when I think of Detroit music, partly because of my limited knowledge of music, I'm back in the 60s, essentially. That's Detroit music for me.
That was a question I wanted to ask you, because they always, say for the Vietnam period, they'll say the soundtrack of the Vietnam War. Was that true?
There wasn't any soundtrack to my.
You guys weren't in your.
I never heard Armed Forces radio the entire time I was in Vietnam. We were out in the bush fighting a war. My war didn't have a soundtrack. That whole Robin Williams, good morning.
Right.
That was not part of my experience. I don't know who was listening to that, but we weren't. We were out in the rice fields getting our asses kicked.
Okay.
I do remember the first time I ever heard some of the heavy metal stuff, the Iron Butterfly and the Doors, and I'm thinking, what the hell's going on in America? This is summer of '67.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what's going on in America? Last I heard, the Supremes were going, "Baby, where did our love go?"
Right.
Eventually, I did.
That's interesting.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking America's crazy, which turns out it was, but not for the music. Fortunately, sometime later, I got back. I actually fell in with some guys who were really big on Smokey Robinson and Marvin Gaye and a lot of that stuff, and so I was able to reconnect. I think they might have been beyond their prime at that point, and when I was in college in the early '70s. I got a slow start in college because I was.
But there was the Philly sound too. Did you ever get partial to that, or
not really?
Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes and all that.
No.
Well, the interesting thing about what Bill's talking about with the Supremes was, and M.L. was talking about earlier with Marvin Gaye, is there was a time when Motown turned the switch and became politically active and vocal about it. Ball of Confusion by the Temptations. There's all these songs that once the door was open, it's really interesting culturally in terms of, we have to talk to Berry Gordy about this, but the sort of, making Motown palatable for white audiences on some level with the Supremes' wigs and gowns and everything. In fact, we have a couple poems in the book about the Supremes like that.
The Ronettes, were they Detroit?
No, it's L.A.
L.A.?
Phil Spector. But they ripped it off from us.
Yeah, they heard Detroit.
It's part of the influence.
So, Jim and Emma, how did you choose the poets for the books and the poems? What were you looking for, and what kind of tone did you want to create?
Oh, that was a crazy process in terms of the variation in it. Like Emil said before, there were some poems we knew we had to have. And then there ended up being some writers we knew we had to have, and that would involve asking them if they hadn't written something already to write something.
For free.
Yeah. So, and we wanted to, it's not like we felt like we had to have complete historical representation because, rights issues would come into play and things like that. But we wanted to create a broad enough swath to tell the tale as significantly as we could across the genres and how they connected to Detroit. So some of the lyrics come from people far afield, like Paul Simon or Gordon Lightfoot, and Robbie Robertson. But what brings them back is they're talking about Detroit or Detroit music in their songs, and in some ways that shows the influence of Detroit music, that these people from all over the place were referencing that in their own songs.
I think what the first step was in the very broad sense is we did decide in a way to pattern it loosely, I would say, because we didn't follow it exactly, but after the essay collection, Heaven Was Detroit, which is the same, jazz, blues, and so forth. This gave us more room to expand in that book. There's a bit of I think it's called pre-Motown or something, but I don't think there's like an essay in Heaven Was Detroit on Aretha specifically, where we have a lot of poems about Aretha in here, and when we expanded it to Northern. So that was the outline. So okay, let's see what poems are out there that we know of and we can research or find that fit those different genres of music. Wasn't that kind of how we did it?
Yeah.
That's how I remember it.
For example, Nikki Giovanni's poem for Aretha, I felt like we had to have that because it was a definitive poem and that really captured a large swath of Aretha's career. And Nikki Giovanni she was nominated for Grammys for spoken word. And so, and if you can watch a video of her performing the poem for Aretha with a sort of gospel background. So that was a really interesting sort of intersection where poetry and music came together. In some ways, Nikki Giovanni, and the poem is about how Aretha was really standing up for black rights and black power in a way that some of the other black artists weren't in that time. So we have pieces that talk to each other. So we have Eminem, and then we have June Jordan's poem Ode to Eminem, which is basically taking him to task for some of the controversies about some of his lyrics being misogynistic and homophobic. And so it's not like all the poems are in harmony or lyrics are in harmony with each other, but they're creating this interesting mix of sometimes contradictory material. That's the music of Detroit.
One of the things I'm really enjoying about this book, and I've only seen it since Tuesday night, and as we're recording this, it's Friday, but I am becoming aware that Detroit music is so much broader and deeper than, I think, as I said, Motown in the 70s, that's Detroit music to me, and I'm learning there's a whole lot more to it than that, which is really cool. I'm enjoying it.
Who surprised you that was a big influence that you had a lot of poetry about? Aretha you might expect, but who would have surprised you on that?
Well, there are some, semi or sort of obscure artists that are mentioned in poems are written about, like Adrian Matika, as it turns out, and he was a finalist for the National Book Award with his book. I think it was called Smoking Joe or something. So, but anyway.
It was Jack Johnson.
Jack Johnson, that's right. So I wanted him to be part of the project, and he said, well, actually, I have some poems on this group that I didn't really know. They were an early version. Mick Collins, who's kind of a known guy, his band is the Dirt Bombs, and they're pretty famous all over. But he had been in this group, I believe it was called Blacktop. And Adrian was like a freak about Blacktop, so he had these poems he wrote about Mick, whom I know. But I didn't know that, I knew that he was in the Gories and then in the Dirt Bombs, but before that he was in this group, and he had one or two poems written about that. So that was kind of a surprise to me because I didn't know about that.
Champtown was a surprise to me because he's this rapper who was this huge influence, and didn't he produce a couple of Eminem's first couple of albums?
He did. He worked with Eminem and the two brothers, not the Bass brothers, but the two brothers, when they formed, Basement, M-I-N-T Productions. He was, and he's a really interesting guy in the sense that others learned from him who are now really famous. He's really famous in a different way. He's a little bit more old school, so he's like pretty tight with like Ice-T and rappers from that period. They all know who he is, and plus he also did a documentary on Detroit hip hop, and it's available on Prime on Amazon, and that is really a deep thing. So I learned a lot too from Champtown. Plus I like him. He's a really he's a little scary maybe, but
but he did a whole documentary about the history of hip hop in Detroit.
In Detroit.
And so,
in fact, not Dr. Dre, but really famous. From Public Enemy, he narrates.
Oh, Chuck D.
Chuck D.
Yeah.
But you didn't answer the question.
Yes.
There's a bunch of poems about Aretha Franklin. What's the next most mentioned artist who's inspired poems in this book? Right?
Is that what you're asking?
Well, I was wondering.
Marvin Gaye, I would say, is big.
I would say Marvin Gaye.
Did that surprise you though?
No, but there's a lot more than I expected. The MC5 are big. Iggy is bigger than I might have thought. I mean, as far as the number of poems about him.
Well, he was kind of a musician's musician after a while, wasn't he? I mean, yeah, he was.
Iggy?
Yeah, the inspiration to a lot of people.
Yeah. And he still doesn't wear a shirt.
Yeah.
Apparently he doesn't wear much, but there.
Yeah, I would rank it maybe Aretha, Marvin Gaye, MC5 as the top three. Mm-hmm. Now, who is the guy who he died? He did basically spoken word stuff, and there were a couple pieces about him.
Well, I'm thinking about that. What was the biggest challenge working on this book?
Well, it was just the time that it took to put all of it together, really, right? And getting permissions and stuff like that. I mean, and then what we were looking for is, I host these different series in Detroit. Cindy read there while we were eating pie and selling books and stuff. I just mentioned, do you have any poems about Detroit? And she goes, actually I do. I mean, not Detroit, but Detroit music. And she said, actually I do. And it's like, okay. Bill, I just make Bill a part of everything I do in my life. So he doesn't really have a choice, and it's been that way for many years now. But because I always want him to be part of the projects that I do, but he always has stuff. Like he said, Midwest poets. And, he said, I don't live in it. I said, well, Percy's kind of Midwest, It's
not even close. But the poems I wrote
I remember that when you said that, now that you mentioned it in that book.
You like to keep it accurate.
Well, I do that. I made, Bill's been on my Labor Poets series. I've even made Alicia Ostreicher a Labor poet. And so I didn't know if Bill had anything, but he was able to. He turned that in like quick, and I'm, well, okay, you know.
Another poet we had to have in was Patricia Smith,
Oh, right.
Oh, yes,
who
absolutely.
has a Motown crown. So imagine how difficult it is to write a crown of sonnets and all about Motown. And that book,
Motown Girls or something.
Jimmy Savannah.
Oh.
There was just we could have had a whole Patricia Smith section, and again you hunt these people down, and then she said, "Oh, I have to be in that book."
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so she was charmed, yeah.
Oh
She
yeah,
wanted to be part
yeah,
of it.
and a lot of people, we're getting responses from people back now who are just thrilled by the company they're keeping, because it's such a strange group of people all united by this music. So poetic styles, musical styles. It's really like a traffic jam of distinct voices.
I was going to say buffet, but traffic jam is a much better
Well,
analogy.
you're stuck in traffic and you're looking around and there's all these very odd people around you, but you're all in the same place.
Yeah, excellent.
So when you look at this book now, what gives you the most joy about it?
Well, seeing it all together, which we did see the galleys of it, but the galleys were, similar to this, but this is even fatter and thicker and, a higher quality paper and everything like that. But kind of like what Bill's experiencing this week, you start looking at it and rereading the poems that we were, selecting before, and you come to the conclusion, and then after hearing 12 or so people last night read, it's like, yeah, this is a monster of a book. It really is. I think it's got a lot of staying power. I think it's going to be very well received in Germany and England and France probably. So take it over there with you next time.
Okay.
But I think, and we were even talking about doing, because I've taught all around in different places, but like Munich is huge into Detroit. I mean, they know more about Detroit music than I do. England, I mean, I remember being on, I think it was Bumbershoot.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the guys, which is this big Seattle thing over Labor Day, and we were on the bus being ridden back to the hotel, and there was a British guy on the bus, and he had like these Detroit records. He was a DJ. That was his gig out there. And I said, oh, I'm from Detroit. And you would have thought I said, like, I'm Superman. Because he was like, wow, really? Are you? Wow. And then he just like was excited and tickled and, half my age and jumping up and down in this van.
Actually, I have a question. More and more people, it seems, often refer to Detroit as the D. I hear it more and more. But in John Lee Hooker's Motor City is Burning, he refers to the D. When did that originate?
Gee, I don't
Probably
know.
with college students at Wayne or something in the 90s or something like that. I mean, I don't remember. We didn't call it.
Well,
But
if it
John Lee
goes back to
Hooker,
the,
it's
Well, he was ahead of everybody.
This is
Did you
where-
remember? I don't remember calling it the D.
No, well,
Motor City, Motown.
yeah.
So what's everybody working on next? Bill, we'll start with you.
I'm getting a poem written every once in a while. I'm actually hoping to get my hands on the papers of a wonderful poet named Lou McKee, who died. He lasted longer than I thought he would because he was morbidly obese, but he was a wonderful writer, and his papers ended up in the hands of a mutual friend of ours who I told Eileen that when I retire, as I did in June, I would help her go through Lou's papers and see. I don't even know what's there. I'm hoping to find enough material to do some kind of a book that includes letters, stories, stuff like that, because he was a wonderful poet. Nobody's ever heard of him except Jim, and he deserves better than that. So I'm hoping that Eileen will eventually. I just saw her a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I'm available now. You know, I'd like to see them. They're buried in Eileen's garage somewhere, and she hasn't dug it out yet. But I'm hoping, if what is there is what I hope is there, that'll keep me busy for a couple of years.
I finished up another manuscript of poems, another manuscript that very much digs into history, Michigan history, and some of my grandma's history in the late 20s and early 30s, and I found a bunch of materials in MSU archives. It was like discovering gold, and I relied on those heavily. I'm working on a really sprawling sort of Emily Dickinson project right now, and I'm approaching the project from all different angles, all different genres, really. I taught book arts at MSU for a few years, and so part of this project involves book arts, traditional book arts, but a lot of writing too. But it's a multi-genre, interdisciplinary project.
Jim.
So this anthology really kicked my butt in terms of the amount of work it went into.
Because normally he does about 10 books a year. So.
But
You're down to 8.
But it was, yeah, I mean, I learned a lot about doing Excel files.
Me too.
And we're still, you asked about the biggest challenge, and one is just handling all the paperwork. I mean, I could wallpaper a house with the amount of paper that we went through and the amount of documentation just to keep track of all this and where is everyone. And you find a poem and then you have to find the person. And so my last book came out earlier this year. That was a book of stories, The Perp Walk. Michigan State University Press has been very supportive of me, and then this project. So it might be time to come back to another manuscript of poems. I do have a long poem that I hope might be at the center of whatever the next book might be. Oh, so the name of the poem is called Gun Shy, and it's about the role of violence in urban communities, and I hope it might be an argument for a little gun control in some way, but it plays off the word gun and the word shy. And and I wrote that poem in the throes of having Lyme disease, so it ended up being a long kind of talking in tongues poem that I had to work with, but it was a kind of freeing up because I was so feverish that it just came pouring out. And I don't know what's going to go around it, but I'm hoping that might be the center of the next book of poems. We'll see.
I just finished up after a number of years of being cajoled and needled and so forth, a memoir that is, all kind of centered around music as it's influenced me or connected me or in different ways. So each chapter, for example, is a different artist that I have some connection to in some way. I mean, the first one I didn't have a personal connection, but is Elvis, because that's what my grandma turned me on to when I was like 4, and that's what happened to me. Thanks, Grandma. Then Beatles and Dylan, and then a lot of people that I've had a chance to work with. I'm able to tell, those stories of being either on the road with them or just being friends with them and so on and so forth. And I didn't want it to be real long. It's definitely not going to be like this book, I don't think. I mean, it's done, and now I got to do the shaping and proofing and all that stuff. And then also a collection of poems, new and selected poems, and that I'm doing it. I'm just looking around at possibilities for that. So, and I'm not thinking I'm going to have any problems with either of those things. The music memoir thing, as I've been told from people in the business, that those are always really popular and people like that, and that's kind of a hook they like. It just happens to be the hook of my life, I guess. So.
Yeah, M.L. is the place where music and poetry come together.
Yes, he exists there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't really, I didn't really start out to do that. What I did start out to do is make poetry accessible to everyday people. That was the ultimate goal. And I thought, because of my interest in music, I just thought, well, one way might be combining, music with poetry. And so many, many years ago, I started doing that, of course, with recordings, instrumental recordings, and putting poems to it. So that's sort of how that, and then it kind of grew into, I'm thinking Canada has a lot to do with this now, because there used to be a series that was called Borderline. So there was a combination between the DIA in Detroit, a literary thing through George Tish's Borders. What was the series called? I can't remember. But they did it once a year, and they would get a couple of poets from each place, and that's how I really started getting integrated into the Canadian scene. I started meeting poets from here, and so they lined up different people. I was lined up, and now historically, who knew at that time? This is years ago now, with Diane Wachowski, who has become a lifelong friend, and Al Purdy, who I think is really famous.
Yes.
And
Al's a Canadian hero.
You're right. He was on that program, and I remember talking to him, before and after the sets. But I had musicians that wanted to play, and so we came over, and my set was with them, and then because of that, other musicians said, we want to play. And then my other friend said, I have a studio. Why don't we make, at that time, an album, vinyl, which is really popular now. Why don't you make a vinyl record, and you know what? You sell that at your readings. Others can sell their books. You can sell either an album or a cassette. And I thought, yeah, and he goes, just come on down, we'll do the music. And then that got kind of popular too, and then others graphed, and then anyway, that started the recording part of it. And, it just grew and grew and grew, and now it's ridiculous, I have to say.
Well, thank you very, very much for your presentation at BookFest tonight of Respect, and thank you all so much for joining us here on the podcast.
Thank you, Kim. It's always a pleasure. It's a great podcast.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.